There is no federal law that clearly prohibits the leak of a Supreme Court opinion draft. It mostly depends on if the leaker legally obtained the material. Setting that aside, it's a gray area for journalists that involves ethics, opportunity, and risk. In this week's In-Depth segment, we gathered a panel of respected Oklahoma journalists to discuss the impact of high-profile, often anonymous media leaks. Here's moderator Susan Cadeau.
Thank you, Rich. Let me go ahead and introduce our panel to you, a great group of journalists here in Oklahoma. First, I'd like to welcome Mike Boettcher, who is a journalism professor at the University of Oklahoma and a former network news correspondent. I'd like to introduce Whitney Bryan, who is a reporter for Oklahoma Watch, a frequent partner with the Oklahoma News Report through that organization, and Dylan Goforth, who is the editor-in-chief of The Frontier, another one of our valued content contributors. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Well, Mike, I'm going to start with you. We're talking about the leak at the Supreme Court, really just a juggernaut of a hit in the news world because of a leak. So I wanted to ask you, can you compare the significance of a leak from the United States Supreme Court? How big of a deal is it? Does it match Watergate? Does it match the Pentagon Papers?
No, I think it's bigger than that, actually. It's a gigantic thing. You know, I've worked with confidential sources all of my career. You know, I was a national security correspondent. I've had to deal with intelligence agencies. But one thing you never heard about or I ever received was a leak from the Supreme Court. I mean, they weren't part of my beat, but I know plenty of reporters who cover the court, and this is unprecedented. It is huge.
Oh, I want to ask all three of you, and Mike, we'll stay with you for a minute on this. What is your take on the ethics of leaking information to the press? Is that a no-no? I know it's not against the law. Is it?
It depends. You can be prosecuted in the area that I know, the intelligence community. You can be prosecuted. With the court, now this is not classified information. So it's legally defined in the law about classified information, but you're dealing with the court. This is confidential and confidential information, and there's a distinction there. So if there was a major leak, let's say from the CIA, and it helped one of our foreign adversaries, that person would be prosecuted. In the court, that's a whole different ballgame. And it is, as far as I can determine, not against the law.
Dylan and Whitney, I want to get your take, first of all, on the ethics of leaks. How big of a deal is this to you guys? And Dylan, we'll start with you. Has that ever happened to you? Have you ever had to wrestle with someone leaking information to you and whether or not to use it?
Oh yeah, I mean that's constantly. We have right now probably 2 or 3 stories we're working on that have come from either dumps from Proton Mail accounts or tips that come through Signal, stuff like that. We deal with that stuff all the time. I've gotten records in trash bags before that have been thrown out of windows. I mean, it all kind. What Mike was saying about the legality of leaks or whatever. We in Oklahoma, like what we deal with more than people worried about, the legality of what they're doing is, Oklahoma's an at-will state, and they're always concerned that not, I'll be charged with a crime, but that if anyone finds out, I'll be fired. And that's always one of our main considerations is figuring out how to report on the, whatever it is, emails or documents, whatever we get, while also doing it in a way that protects the identity of the person who has, given the documents to us, and because they can face retaliation. I mean, they can be fired.
Yeah. Whitney, have you ever had to wrestle with this decision of whether to leak information that's come to you? And if so, what criteria do you use or should journalists use when looking at this?
Absolutely. I mean, like Dylan said, we deal with that a lot at Oklahoma Watch. A colleague of mine is working on a story right now that involves the leak. I am personally working on a story right now that involves a leak. We got the tip through what began as an anonymous source. Now, in that case, the person who leaked us the information eventually told me who they were. And I was able to verify some of the information based on who the person was that was providing that information. So that's obviously huge for, accuracy and making sure that what we're getting is legitimate information. Accuracy is obviously our first priority. Can we verify that the information we're receiving is accurate and truthful? And then the next question is, does it serve the public for us to tell this story, to put this information out?
Mike, let's talk about that. Did this leak serve the public interest when we look at the protest? Is it knowledge that the American public needed to have before a ruling was handed down from the Supreme Court? What's your opinion?
Me?
Yes.
I don't think any leak from the Supreme Court in advance or in advance of a ruling is helpful. I think it attacks the underpinnings of the court itself, the public's trust in the court, and the court is so crucial to this nation's future that it being undermined, no matter what the decision is or no matter what side of the fence you are on it, I don't see it as helpful. And this is my own personal view. I see it as something that really does, pick away at the institution bit by bit.
As journalists, kind of in the middle of receiving that information and deciding whether or not to deliver it, it's really for our audiences, kind of a look inside and explaining to them, for lack of a better analogy, how the sausage gets made, right? And so is it important that the public understand this process?
I think whistleblowers are incredibly important in the information they provide journalists. And I think it works as a check of abuse of power. Now, in the world that I covered, which was national security for decades, you really have to weigh when you receive leaks. First off, you try to consider, is this an authorized leak? Because there are authorized leaks out there that come from the top. It could be a lower ranking person who has been authorized by the director of an agency to leak information in order to affect policy or opinion worldwide on some issue. A leak to achieve a political end game or goal, that happens in Washington every minute of every hour of every day. It doesn't happen with the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And that's what concerns me about this particular leak, that I don't know what good effect it can actually have, if it's going to sway someone's mind or harden positions.
Yeah. Dylan, I want to ask you, as a journalist, do you think the identity of the person who leaked this information should be made public?
You're talking about the Supreme Court?
Yes.
Leak? Oh, man. I think it's worth knowing their background and what their aims were in leaking it. The identity of the person themselves, if they're known to the reporter and that reporter and their editor, they've spoken about it, that outlet knows who it is. I don't know that knowing the identity of who it was helps anyone. I think knowing what their aims were in leaking it can help kind of inform how people feel about the leak itself. But the person itself, I mean, unless they come forward, I think as a reporter that if you get a leak and you tell someone, I won't, your identity is safe with me, that's an agreement that you don't go back on. And so it would be up to them.
Whitney, is that an agreement you would not go back on even if you were given jail time? And now, having said, Dylan saying that does not think the identity is needed, maybe the motivations, what are your thoughts? And we know in the journalistic world that is in America right now, if it's found everywhere, every journalist is trying to find out who it is, correct? Do you think that's true?
I think it is probably true that a lot of journalists are trying to find out who the leak came from. Part of that I would hope is sincere motivations that they're reporting on the leak too, whether it was sent directly to them or not. So for us at Oklahoma Watch, if we were to start reporting on that specific leak, of course we would want to know who the person is who leaked it, because again, as Dylan suggested, motivation has a lot to do with how we take in that information, how we view that information, and how we vet and report on that information. So, absolutely journalists across the country want to know who that person is. But as far as identifying them, I agree with what Dylan said. I don't know that the person's identity is as important to sort of plaster on the front of newspapers as it is for the journalists and editors to know who it is and be able to vet that person and understand, the motivations behind a leak like that.
Mike, I'm going to give you the final word in this discussion. If there's anything else you'd like to touch on that Oklahomans would find interesting about this kind of an inside view. And also, when you're teaching ethics and journalism at the University of Oklahoma, such an esteemed journalism school there, have you seen the ethics in journalism change, and where do you think we stand now?
I think we're getting looser about that, and we try to drill that into the students at the University of Oklahoma, at Gaylord College, that you really want to follow the ethical path. But what we do as a job in journalism is go out and seek information. We find sources. We depend on confidential sources. I think that we have to consider sometimes, though, as journalists, and this is the tough part of the job, what is the gain and what is the loss on this, on the scale. And, for example, I have been told highly classified information by intelligence officials in order to educate me about a bigger picture global security issue. Now, I could have gone out and reported those issues, but people would have died. Certainly would have died if I would have done that. Right. And so every time I deal with this, there's not a one size fits all on this at all. You've got to consider every case on its merits, and you've got to work through the motivations and of that person leaking that information. And what is their bias? What are they trying to achieve? And does it serve the greater good? And that is the great responsibility that's put on our shoulders as journalists, operating with sensitive information, is how to proceed. It's the old saying, do no harm. And in our jobs, we're trying to do good things. We're trying to educate the public. But if a leak comes and it's trying to really weaken our institutions and our republic, then I draw a line.
Right. I'm going to leave it right there. I'd like to thank all three of you for your insight into this topic that is really gripping the entire nation, and we'll keep watching to see what happens next. Thank you all for being with us.
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan.